Good evening and welcome to Sports Hour on WNYF. I'm Matt Volz. We got a full show for you tonight, and starting off this evening's show, I'm joined by Chris LeGros of the Career Development Office on campus. Chris, great to have you here tonight.
Oh, it's great to be back. I haven't been here in like 3 years. It's fun.
Absolutely. So we're going to lead off the show talking about some March Madness. Now, Chris, you teach a course that I took last year that's called bracketology. Can you tell a little bit about that class?
Yeah, in bracketology, it's a one-credit class that you can take that recreates the selection committee. The students in the class play those roles. They vote, they rank teams, they seed teams, and then they put them into the bracket just like the committee would. We don't have all the bells and whistles they have, but we can do it manually, and so you get to really feel what the committee's doing when they get together during championship week and put all that together. You learn all the different ranking systems that the committee uses to rate the teams, and you get to vote. The participants vote like the committee would, and so we build a bracket just like they do.
Yeah, and it was a class that, again, I had mentioned I was able to take last year. And being a fan of a team for myself, I'm a St. Bonaventure fan, so being a fan of a team that is sometimes on the bubble was definitely really neat. And Chris, there's a lot of very interesting bubble teams to watch this year in some powerhouse conferences. Who are some of the bubble teams you're looking at?
Well, I've been paying a lot of attention to the SEC. The bottom of the SEC is really hard to sort out. There has never been a at-large team with a worse than 7-11 conference record. That's not something the committee looks at specifically, but it just has always worked out that way. And right now, Georgia and Oklahoma, which are very much on the bubble, very much in play, are 4-10. Arkansas and Texas are 5-9, and so there's not a lot of room for them to get those wins. And I think either that's going to break this year, some of those teams from the bottom end of that conference are getting in, or they're going to sort themselves out, and teams like Indiana or North Carolina will win just enough to get themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a fan, I mentioned being a fan of a St. Bonaventure team. I'm also a fan of one of the big dogs as an Auburn Tigers fan, and I can tell you that Georgia just gave Auburn a pretty good run for their money on Saturday. So you've got some teams in the SEC who might not have very good conference records, but you would put them up against maybe a smaller team, and they present quite a challenge, and they have a legitimate case for why they could be in the tournament.
They play so many games against such good teams, such quality opponents, that it gets to be hard to say, well, you can't keep. How do you keep them out? They're challenging themselves every game. You look at a team on the bubble like VCU or Drake, and their overall records are much better, but they're not playing the level of competition that they are. It's tough. I'm a fan of the mid-majors too, of a team like Bana or teams in their conference, and they seem to be the ones that get shut out in this scenario. So I always hope they get in, but they usually don't.
Yeah, and I can personally attest to the frustration that a lot of these smaller schools feel when you might get to the end of a season and your team has maybe 23 or 24 wins, and you get left out of the tournament for a power team, a team from a power conference that has 19 or maybe sometimes even 18 wins. I mean, I wrote my final paper in your bracketology class. I wrote about the 2016 selection when St. Bonaventure did not make it to the tournament, and you had Syracuse, who I believe was a 19-win team, who made it in that year. Syracuse did go on a run as a 10 seed, went all the way to the Final Four that year, but you also had Tulsa got in as an 11 seed, and there were some ethical concerns with that. But
they make some strange choices sometimes,
yes.
And you wonder why they do. Sometimes they tell you in the selection show why they chose this team over that team. Often, though, when they pick a team, it's not usually a big reach. It's usually one of the top 2 or 3 teams out. So it's not a big shift, but sometimes it is. And I think that Tulsa team might have been the one that was kind of a reach, and that really you could really question it. The thing is, though, these teams in the SEC, these at the low end of the bubble in them, they have to worry about teams stealing bids. A team like if Drake doesn't win the Missouri Valley tournament, they don't get the auto bid, but they might take an at-large bid if they make their final. Or a team like like if St. Mary's or Gonzaga doesn't win the West Coast tournament, that team's gonna squeeze out one of these low-end bubble teams. So there's a lot happening during championship week, and it's not always a sure thing, even when they have the good schedules and the good strength of schedule. So.
Yeah, really any team who's remotely close and being on the bubble, there's always that sort of level of anxiety. And talking about the Atlantic 10 as well, we talked about how George Mason seems to probably be, George Mason and VCU seem to be looking fairly good for getting into whether it be at large or winning the conference tournament. But you've got other teams. There are so many teams in the Atlantic 10 that are right in the middle. I mean, those standings really, once you get below George Mason and VCU, you've got Dayton, obviously, St. Bonaventure, St. Joe's, Richmond. There's so many teams that are, and I don't know, I can't even think off the top of my head exactly who's all in there. Loyola Chicago is right in there as well. There's so many teams that are right in the mix. I mean, really, the middle seeds in the Atlantic 10 tournament it might take until the very last games of the regular season to sort some of those out. And then you might have some teams, Rhode Island is also in that mix too, that you might see some teams that could go on a run and make some of these power teams on the bubble sweat.
We saw Duquesne do it a year or two ago, and they made some noise when they got there too. So I think if VCU and Mason both win out and go to the finals, I think they could both get in. I think VCU is highly regarded enough, especially if VCU loses that game. I think they've done enough that they'll probably get in. I'm not sure if Mason is quite as highly regarded right now that they would get that second bid if they lost that game.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of big-time Division I basketball teams, it has been a rough year for the Syracuse Orange, as we mentioned, and a team that may not even get into their own conference tournament. I know that's a team that you're a fan of, so this year has been not ideal, I understand.
It's been painful. It has been very painful and very much unexpected. I think hopes were very high. Donnie Freeman got hurt in January, has not played since. He was one of their freshmen they were counting on. And I think J.J. Starling missed a couple games. The competition, I know the ACC is down, but you're still playing pretty good teams more often than you're not. And Syracuse is just not winning games. They don't seem to do anything particularly well. They don't defend well. They don't score well. They don't shoot threes. It's kind of frustrating to watch. And I'm really rooting for Adrian Autry. I really like him. He's been with the program a long time. I remember him as a player for the team. He learned at Boeheim's side. I really don't want to see him fail. But they have a top 15 class coming in next year. And I want the right guy to be leading it. And I don't know if it's him.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that coaching has been something that, as a St. Bonaventure fan, I've been fortunate. That has not really been a discussion unless the overarching fear of, is Mark Schmidt going to leave and take another? It seems like almost every single year there is a D1 job that opens up in the Boston area where he's originally from, and it seems like every year people say, oh, Mark Schmidt's leaving St. Bonaventure to go to Boston College or wherever else. I remember the discussion after Frank Mason was gone at UMass. There was discussion that Mark Schmidt's gonna go to UMass, which would not have made any remote sense. But there's always sort of that discussion in there that gets mixed in, and that's certainly an issue for Syracuse. Sometimes,
especially with Schmidt, he might just be very happy where he is.
Yep.
And I love that they hired Wojnarowski, is that his name?
Yeah,
to be their
Wojnarowski,
GM or something. Yeah, that was a great idea, and I hope that works out for them. With Syracuse, again, they have been working with Boeheim so long. It was probably hard to go outside the family. I wouldn't have blamed them if they did, but I also don't blame them for trying to give Autry a shot. I think it was between him and McNamara wound up in Siena. He's doing okay there, I think. But I think I think it's likely they're going to give him one more year and let him try it. He's a pretty good recruiter, I think, and I think they'll try it with Carmelo Anthony's son coming in and another a guy even better than him on the ranking list anyway. So I think they're going to try it, but I think if they fail next year, that's going to be it, and they're going to go outside and find somebody different.
Yeah, and that certainly may have to happen. It's crazy to think about Syracuse being a team that they've struggled so much they may not even make the ACC tournament. And it's a year, Chris, like you said, that the ACC is a little bit down. They don't have, the SEC's got several teams that will probably get at-large bids. Whoever wins that conference tournament, for my own selfish sake, I hope it's Auburn, or really anyone except for Alabama, to be completely honest. But it's going to be interesting to see how these sort of things play out. And there's a few games left for Syracuse, so it's possible that they could win a couple and find their way into one of the lower seeds of the tournament. But I think you're right. I think it's going to be difficult.
I think they'll get into the ACC tournament, but I think they'll be a one and done. And it's a shame. I would be shocked. They'll get probably somebody in like an 8 seed or someone like that, and they'll probably get beat by them. They just haven't shown that they can beat anybody that's even mediocre. So I hate to be hard on them, but they just haven't shown it, and it's a shame. Do you know they still lead the NCAA in attendance because the dome is so big? They can pack so many people in there, and so they still do, but. That's not going to last if it continues like this, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. Tough year for the fans in the middle of the state, for sure. For St. Bonaventure's purposes, right now, at least the last I knew, they were slated to be somewhere around the 7, 8, 9 seed in the conference tournament, and that may set them up against a team like Rhode Island in the second round, so they'd get a bye from the first. But there's a good chance that if they win that game, St. Bonaventure would have to get through a team like VCU or George Mason to make it to the semifinals and then make it past there. And do you see St. Bonaventure as being a team that has an NIT shot, or are they really going to have to go on a run to get there?
I think that there's a chance. I think it would take a run like to the final to even have a chance at that. I think that the way they're picking the NIT is different than it's been. In the old system, I think they'd have a very solid chance. But now I think that they doing it how they do, it really advantages the power conference schools. And you know what else? If Bonna is an 8 or 9, even a 7, they're going to end up playing either VCU or George Mason. They beat VCU, so they know they can do it on a neutral court. So anything's possible, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be a very tough road. Yeah,
absolutely. This year has sort of in conference play been a disappointing. The Bonnies started the season incredibly hot. They played a non-conference schedule that, in all honesty, was pretty weak for the most part, and they largely dominated that conference schedule. But they're 7 and 8 in conference play, which is not as good as you usually see from St. Bonaventure. But the last few years, Mark Schmidt has essentially had to remake his entire starting 5. I mean, a few years ago, they had all 5 players they nicknamed them the Iron Man 5. And those 5 players would play pretty much every minute of every game. And he's had to remake his roster virtually every year. And that's something that could change as Adrian Wojnarowski is the GM, but it's something that's presented a challenge for St. Bonaventure.
Well, and I think it's a challenge for a lot of teams because you have with so much turnover with the portal and name, image, and likeness money in that. I don't mean to pick on that. I'm happy that players have access to that revenue now, but it does make it a major challenge to keep teams together, to build a team, to build a program. Like you said, guys would stay together. You'd have some people for 3 or 4 years, and you can build around that. And you really don't know that you're going to have that now. Makes it really hard at every level, not just at the Bonna level, but Syracuse is facing it. A lot of other schools are facing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick before our segment ends, do you have a favorite for this tournament? Is there one team that you're looking at that you really think has a shot to go all the way?
It's really hard not to pick Auburn. It really is, not just because you're hosting and I know that's your team. Really hard to pick against Auburn. But Duke could beat them, and dark horse Michigan State.
Absolutely, and Duke did beat them earlier in the season with Cooper Flagg and the excellent season that he's had. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us for this segment of the show. Good luck with your bracket and your seed list, however that turns out. We are going to take a short break. Jack Hoadley will join me in a few moments to talk some NBA action. I'm Matt Volz, and you're watching Sports Hour on WNYF.
This one's for the real ballers and shot callers, the sisterhood of women in tech. They're discovering cures, building apps, and programming the blockchain. They're CEOs, worldwide hustlers who can make it rain. They're tearing down the old boys club and seeing big gains. 'Cause when women in tech come together, you know they make that change.
Every day,
millions of people are connecting
and even though we're overcoming obstacles,
watching each other's backs,
and banding together.
we should still make an effort.
We should still make an
to
effort.
get to know each other,
on a deeper level.
Father,
cosplayer,
Mentor.
Actor.
it's time we take a step forward
it's time we take a step forward.
Come together.
and discover
How accepting our differences
can make us stronger.
How prepared is your family if a hurricane shows up at your doorstep, or a flood, or a blizzard? You can't just turn away a natural disaster. That's why it's important to go to ready.gov/plan now. It has the tools and tips you need to make an emergency plan with your family. So if disaster comes knocking,
Let's go.
you'll be ready to help keep your family safe.
It's just a pizza.
Make a plan today.
Most of my family, they never graduated high school or even let alone go to college, so I'm trying to break that barrier. Every day after work, went straight to school, studied hard, and it paid off. I could not have done it alone. I see the future is really bright for me. The high school diploma is just added to the confidence, and now I feel unstoppable.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Welcome back to Sports Hour on WNYF. I'm Matt Volz. I'm now joined by Jack Hoadley to talk about the NBA. And Jack, I know you just mentioned to me while we were on our break, this is a very, very big night in the NBA, especially for your team.
Yeah, huge night for specifically two teams and one player, as Luka Doncic will play the Mavericks. I can't believe I'm saying this, but he will play the Mavericks in LA tonight at 10 o'clock. It'll be the first time that he's matched up against the team. It's a very weird feeling, to say the least, as a Mavericks fan, and it's definitely not much better than how those Syracuse Orange fans are feeling right now. But, yeah, it's an odd feeling, and I don't know, it'll be an interesting game to watch for sure.
Yeah, the best thing that I can compare it to, and I'll bring my hockey knowledge into it, and I won't stay on this point for too long, but it reminds me of about, what it would be, 11 years ago now, somehow 11 years ago now, when the Sabres traded Ryan Miller to the St. Louis Blues, and they had their first game when Ryan Miller, and then that next season when Miller was playing for Vancouver and came back to Buffalo. It's when you see someone who has been a franchise icon for several years. I mean, Miller had been the face of the Sabres for longer, but you see someone who's been such a franchise icon and is now playing against your team for the first time. And it's not like it's a situation where it ended on bad terms for the player individually, where like the player, there was this whole big issue and they left in free agency. You know, it's not like when LeBron went back to Cleveland for the first time, or, you know,
Well,
when
that was hostile.
which was hostile. That's what I'm talking about.
But for different reasons.
Right. It's not necessarily the same case, maybe not as hostile, because Luka was traded and wasn't necessarily, you know, didn't necessarily force his way out of Dallas, or like when the Sabres played Jack Eichel the first time when he was with Vegas. It's definitely different, and I know this is a game that Dallas really needs to win.
It's a huge game. in Dallas' season specifically, not necessarily for the Lakers. They are the 4th seed in the West. They're sitting at 34-21, missing a few games because of those tragic fires in LA. But really, they're a couple games behind the rest of the league right now, along with the Clippers, which gives them an advantage in some way because they have those games up on other people. But yeah, 34-21, they are fine. The Mavericks currently, their 3 best big men are out on injury. They are just getting Dwight Powell back tonight, which is going to be a big add for them if they want to even come close to winning this game. But the one thing I know as a Mavericks fan and a Luka fan is that when he's playing angry, he is an unstoppable player. So let's just hope that he's sad and not angry tonight, as it could be a 50-point performance from him against his former team very quickly tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saw the type of player that Luka is and is capable of being when he led Dallas to the NBA Finals last year. So they know, Mavericks fans know better than anyone, the type of player that Luka Doncic is, and it'll be interesting to watch tonight for sure.
And I could speak for all of the Mavericks fans when I say that we are rooting for Luka tonight and absolutely not that horrible excuse for an NBA team. I hope that our general manager is there so that I can laugh at him as we probably lose by 15-plus points minimum.
Well, that
anything can happen, but I don't see a win tonight.
I mean, that begs the discussion, you know, if Dallas has a rough ending to their season, if they miss the playoffs, what does that mean for general manager Nico Harrison's future? I mean, does that potentially put his job at risk? Because you make a move like this, I've said this about different sports other than basketball as well. As a general manager, anytime you make a massive deal that drastically changes the makeup of your team, you put, if it's different if you're a general manager who's been with the team for 20 years and you've won several championships, but Nico Harrison has not been.
Not at all.
So if you're a general manager like that, you kind of put your job on the line with a deal like this. And if it doesn't work out well for Dallas, could he pay for it with his job?
He might, and he said it himself a couple weeks ago, right when the trade was made, that this could be a move that defines his career as a general manager. And I would be saying that as well if there wasn't 2 things keeping his job right now. The Mavs have a very good team still. There's no doubt about that. Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, depth at every position on the floor. You could argue they're the deepest team in basketball. And they are 3-2 in their last 5. If it wasn't for that loss on Sunday to the Warriors, they'd be 4-1. So there was definitely hope there that they could continue this and kind of like fight through this. And then the other aspect is that Mavs ownership pushed this trade along, which is weird because why would you do this? Why would you trade a top 5 player in the NBA? I don't know. Again, I could go on and on for the rest of the show, not even my segment, but it's just ridiculous. It'll be a fun game to watch tonight for sure, as these are 2 explosive teams. Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Luka Doncic, those are really the only names I have to say for you to be in your seat for this game tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll definitely be a fun one. That's a later game tonight.
Yeah, 10 p.m.
That's for sure. It's starting
Skip
at 10
your classes.
p.m. Yeah, there you go. So the playoffs, the way it's shaping out, there's still a little ways to go in the rest of the season, but there's a good mix of teams. I mean, I know at the Eastern Conference, you have Cleveland, who has just torn through the rest of the conference so far this year, but you've got Boston, who's also at the top. You've got my New York Knicks, who are at the top as well, and some other teams that are very much in the mix. But the West is really, really well. Okay, they're 3rd in the East, Jack. They're not. They're a ways. I mean, they're 10 games behind Cleveland. Or they're 10 games behind. Yeah, they're 10 games behind Cleveland and a handful behind Boston as well. They're 4 behind Boston as well. But even still.
Absolutely. I'll give the credit.
The upper echelon of teams in the Eastern Conference at the very least. But I know the Western Conference is definitely looking like it's very competitive as well.
Oh my gosh, call it the Wild West because you have teams in the East that are 12 games below 500, like the Bulls, and still fighting for a play-in spot. And then teams that are a game or more above 500, barely staying in that race for the playoffs. One of those teams that I'm shocked that's not there is the Phoenix Suns. It's just crazy how a team that's built like that isn't there. But really for those teams in that 6 through 10 spot, the Kings, Warriors, Mavericks, Timberwolves, and Clippers, it's going to be a dogfight. They're going to have to win a lot of games down the stretch. And honestly, as a Mavericks fan perspective, that odd team out right now, if they can't get healthy quick, is going to be the Mavericks. If the Suns surge, you could be looking at an 11th seed team that has a lottery pick this year. But one of the more interesting teams is the San Antonio Spurs, who have had a crazy week, losing Victor Wembanyama and possibly De'Aaron Fox for the rest of the season, which makes me wonder. You saw it earlier with the Spurs when they landed Tim Duncan with David Robinson. Yeah. Is there any chance that the Spurs could land Cooper Flagg to pair him alongside Victor Wembanyama. Obviously leading Duke to a 1 seed, I'm assuming, in
More
the
than likely, I would
March
imagine.
Madness tournament. But could he be playing in San Antonio next year, which would be scary for NBA?
I mean, you
teams
look
alike.
at either of the two players who are contending for the top college player between Flagg at Duke or Janai Broome at Auburn. Either one of those two players, you add one of them to a team that already has Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox, and that could be a very, very dangerous team.
Not to mention a team that might have the Rookie of the Year this year in Stephon Castle. He has been balling out of his mind. He's been playing great. Great defensive player. So they're a deep team. They have the best coach in NBA history, Greg Popovich. I don't think it's a really ridiculous thing to say that. So you have them in the West that are falling back, but a team that is not is the Golden State Warriors. They are surging as of late. They are 5-1 since acquiring Jimmy Butler. They've split games with the Mavericks in that time, so I've watched plenty of Warriors basketball. My brother's a huge Warriors fan, and he's very excited right now, but they are one of the hottest teams in the league. They could fight themselves into even the 5th or 6th spot if they keep playing this well. So the West is going to be such an interesting watch down the stretch of these last 1.5 months of the season, and I don't know. I'm going to be skeptical when it comes to April to see what teams are going to be in there. I don't want to be in the play-in spot if I'm an NBA team, because any one of those teams could be those teams could beat each other in a 1-game situation or 2-game situation with the play-in anytime. So it's going to be an interesting watch for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned Golden State, and we kind of talked. I mentioned it last week too, but when you have those generational talents like Golden State has with Steph Curry, you're always at least going to be in the discussion for making the playoffs. It's kind of the same thing a lot of people have said about Josh Allen and the Bills, is that as long as the Bills have Josh Allen, they're going to be at least in the conversation. So they're a team that, even though the Warriors aren't what they were a decade ago, they're a threat. Obviously, with now both Curry and Butler, there's a lot of interesting teams in the West. Obviously, you have Oklahoma City has had the dominant season. Jokic could be on his way to another MVP in Denver. And you've got some top players, obviously the Lakers now with Luka and LeBron. So there's a lot of teams that could be in the mix.
But what I also want to say is that you look at this board right now, and I find it hard to believe that Minnesota, Dallas, or Golden State couldn't beat Memphis, Houston, or LA in a 7-game, or the Clippers in a 7-game series. I don't know what the Lakers look like yet. They haven't really gotten their chemistry, but they've looked really good in 1 or 2 games. But with that, like a team like the Warriors that's surging right now at the right time could absolutely play 4 games in Memphis and still come out on top and upset them as a 3-6 matchup, or upset the Rockets as a 4-5 matchup. If I'm Oklahoma City or if I'm Denver, I would not want to play a healthy Mavericks team, the Timberwolves, or the Warriors as a 1-8 seed or a 2-7 seed. There could be some historic upsets in this NBA bracket this year. It's going to be fun to watch. I don't know if there's going to be a playoff game this year that's going to get more watchers than this game tonight, but it's going to be a good playoffs for sure to watch. Should be interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I believe to be true in I've said it mostly about baseball, but it's true in really any sport, that it is not necessarily the team that is the best throughout the season that goes on a run in the playoffs. It's the team that gets hot at the right time. And we've seen that in the past with some champions before, of teams who were not projected to win it and then go on an incredible run and either get to the finals or win the championship. That's a thing in not just basketball, but several other sports. So there's some teams that could potentially get hot towards the end of the regular season and go on a run.
Absolutely, and I'm very much looking forward to baseball season as a Yankees fan. It's really the shining light for my teams right now, but I mean, especially as becoming an adopted Sabres fan, there's definitely not much to look forward to there. So I'm in quite despair right now. I can't speak for hockey, but you're absolutely right. It's getting hot at the right time in a lot of these leagues, and it's going to be very interesting to see how not just the NBA, but also the NHL season shapes up down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to watch, and again, there's some time left as we wind more towards the end of April and the end of the NBA season. So that'll wrap it up for this segment. Thanks for joining me again, as always, Jack. We'll be back in a few moments. Lily will join me to talk about some major action that went down in the National Lacrosse League today. We'll be back in a few. I'm Matt Volz, and you're watching Sports Hour on WNYF.
We've been down there. You gotta do the same. Takes no time, just sign on the line at the post office. Selective service.
Hey guys, if you're about to turn 18, you've got to register with Selective Service. It's simple. Just go down to the post office, fill out a card, and turn it in. That's all there is to it. There's no draft now. You're just adding your name to Selective Service's list in case there's a national emergency.
So if you're 18 now, Selective Service, you gotta get down to the post office.
Register with Selective Service. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the law.
Takes no time, just sign on the line at the post office. Selective Service.
When you think of the local lowdown, what do you think of?
Well, when I think of the local lowdown, it's the live music that we have played in the studio.
It's got to be the laughs we shared. The memorable moments during the whole thing. Oh my God, so fun.
The local lowdown for me is the people behind the scenes, the amazing team that we have making the show.
Oh, it's got to be exploring all sorts of genres and music I've never heard before.
Oh, easy. Going out to shows and talking to artists and getting the latest news on what they have planned for the future.
It's about these artists, man. Giving them a platform to showcase what they've worked so hard on and show their music to the community. It's all about supporting the local scene of music to keep it running for years to come. And of course, the band merch. You can't forget about the merch.
Welcome back to Sports Hour on WNYF. I'm Matt Voltz. I'm now joined by Lily Howard to talk about the National Lacrosse League. A big day for at least one team in the league trade-wise.
Still number one in the league. Well, the Bandits are still number one in the league. We just need to address first things first. The Bandits are indubitably the best team in the NLL. So here's for that. But we need to talk about a major trade. There have been lots of trades that have been going on today in the NLL. Biggest one, in my opinion, Nick Rose, the goalie of the Toronto Rock, is going to Calgary. How are we feeling about this?
I mean, so I heard about this trade this morning, and when I walked into my 9:30 a.m. class today, and my friend said, "Did you see what Adam Levi just tweeted?" Adam Levi is one of the lead insiders on the National Lacrosse League. And he said Nick Rose is going to Calgary, and my jaw dropped. I mean, Nick Rose is a goaltender. He was the goalie of the year in the league last year, led Toronto to the best record in the league last year, and now he's gone. He's going to Calgary, and it's a team that they've had a hole since Christian Del Bianco has not played this year. So that is like the trade of the year potentially for the Rock.
I don't know what they're going to do without him. I mean, they're not doing very well with him. So, honestly, do whatever you got to do. But I don't know. I honestly think that Nick Rose was the one thing that team may have had, like, on their side.
Yeah, absolutely. And that wasn't even the only notable trade that Toronto made today. Former Bandits defenseman Mitch Desnoux also traded. He is going to the Philadelphia Wings. So it very much looks like this is a retool / teardown of the Toronto Rock roster. And it's crazy to say that about a team that just last year had the best record in the NLL. They finished 15-3. Nick Rose was the goaltender of the year in the NLL. They have reached the league semifinals every year since 2019. Of course, 2020 and 2021, the playoffs did not happen, but 2019, 22, 23, and 24, the Rock reached the league semifinals every single year. Now, not to sound arrogant, Lily, but who was the team that beat them in all four of those playoff series? It was the Buffalo Bandits, but it's definitely surprising to have Toronto now essentially not be a threat. They're 3-8, and now their goaltender and one of their top defensemen gone in a day.
Right. It does make me a little bit nervous if they're planning on rebuilding. I don't know. There's a lot of fresh young talent that could come in for this team. Not anything the Bandits really need to worry about if we get our defense back in check. But yeah, we can get to that in a minute. I wish Nick Rose nothing but the best. I cannot wait for the Bandits to play against Calgary. Not this week, next week they'll be playing the Roughnecks. So He'll get another matchup with Buffalo, and it should be a pretty good one.
Well, it's funny to mention, so the Rock have already played the Bandits twice this season, and Rose was in goal for both of those games. The Roughnecks have 2 more games against the Bandits. So not only does Nick Rose now have to play the Bandits 4 times in one season, he has to go to Banditland twice.
Right.
That is not something that most players probably want to do if you're playing for an opposing team, especially if you're the opposing goalie.
And if you're Nick Rose.
And if you're
we
Nick
already
Rose.
have such a rivalry with you.
Yes.
There are 3 things that I think are pretty much guaranteed in life. It's death, taxes, and Chase Fraser scoring on Nick Rose. So good luck, man. Wishing you nothing but the best, but Bandits all the way.
Well, absolutely. And speaking of the Bandits, they got back in the win column last week with another nail-biter against a team that seems to know how to play them very well in the San Diego Seals. Bandits win at 13-12 to go to 8-1 and maintain their top spot in the league standings. So back in the win column, Lily, another very, very close game out on the West Coast.
Super close game. I mean, I was really nervous this upcoming week, especially with, San Diego being the team that, led us to our first loss of the season. But it was pretty scary. San Diego took the first goal, which we've seen this before, and we know where, we've been down by 5 goals in the last 2 games before this, so it was pretty scary. But Dane Smith responded right after that. 46 seconds later, responding back to San Diego. Loved that. He's number 3 in the top scorers in the NLL right now. Love that. That's incredible. And just a total nail biter. Like I mentioned earlier, this defense, I think they're not doing all they possibly could. I think that they need to step it up a little bit. We still got some classic Bandits goals. Tehoka Nanako showed up again that night in a really typical Tehoka goal behind the net. Super sweet assist from Josh Byrne. Great goal, but I don't know. They're not playing like the Bandits. I don't know. It's making me nervous.
It definitely, I share that feeling with you. San Diego feels like a team that sort of has the Bandits figured out. The Seals are not necessarily the best team, but they know how to play Buffalo.
We should have them figured out because that's Kyle Buchanan's old team.
Yes, exactly. So in theory you would think, but it makes at least me a little bit nervous if we do end up drawing San Diego in the playoffs. That's potentially a scary matchup for Buffalo.
No, for sure.
You look at the other teams, looking ahead on the schedule, the Bandits are in Saskatchewan, a matchup between the number 1 and number 2 teams in the league on Saturday up in Canada. It's going to be a matchup to watch for sure. Matt Vince, despite letting in 12, I thought was pretty good last week, considering the fact that his defense definitely struggled, and you're down Matt Spanger. There were a few goals that for sure they had reviewed, whether Foot was in the crease, and I love the one that seemingly took forever on a goal for Buffalo that Tavares challenged and eventually won that challenge.
Right.
You could see that you could just clearly see the penalty box review attendant, whoever it was there, is not wanting to admit the truth as he's watching them replay the video.
No, for sure.
They said on the broadcast how if that game was in Buffalo, they'd probably show it 3 or 4 or 5 times on the video board, but they didn't show it at all in San Diego, which was interesting and fair for it being that home field advantage for sure. But
they were trying to keep the spirits high at Margaritaville night.
Oh my gosh.
We need to, that's one thing that we could learn from San Diego, because that is a great theme. So KeyBank Center, let's get some Jimmy Buffett going in the KeyBank Center. Are you kidding? That would be fantastic.
That would heal a part of my soul at the very
100%.
least. I mean, Honky Tonk Night back on January 18th
that was great.
The night of my life too. I mean,
much fun.
It was incredible. And then they had an event at Buffalo Ironworks. It was the Electric Rodeo. So it was a night made for me.
Right.
And the Bandits beat Philadelphia that night as well. So it was phenomenal. So it's going to be interesting moving forward at Saskatchewan, and then you have back-to-back against Nick Rose and Calgary, 1 at home and 1 on the road. So familiar goaltender, even if you don't play Calgary quite as much, the next few weeks are going to be very telling for the Bandits season as far as how it's going to go.
These back-to-back games are making me nervous
Mm.
because we're giving the other teams so much time to like learn how we play and regroup and watch the footage and get everything all together. Let's not give them that chance. Let's play them like once at the beginning and then like once at the end so they can forget how good we are. We can be so much better, and we're doing great. I don't want to sound like I'm hating on them all the time because we are #1 in the league. Don't you forget it. But I kind of would like more from the back-to-back champions. At least the defense. Like Swenny says it every night. Like, how about a defense? Come on, like, come on.
Yeah, it's defensively. I mean, I know you lost Matt Spanger for the year, but even still, defensively, there's been some struggles that are a little bit uncharacteristic of the Bandits. And the last couple, that was the same case, I mean, last year before they brought in Paul Dawson.
Right.
It was the defense struggled a little bit as well, and the rest of the regular season, they had their ups and downs, and then really locked it down once they got towards the playoffs. And they are a second-half team. They are a fourth-quarter team, that's for sure. But they are now. I mean, they weren't earlier in the season. But the rest of the year, so the Rush, for next week's game, the Rush 9-2, the Bandits 8-1. It's the two top teams in the NLL, and going up to Saskatchewan. First time these two teams have played this year. It always makes me think when the Bandits lost to the Rush in 2016 in the finals. Always kind of gives me some bad memories from that year. And that's a team that you think about. Dane Smith was on that team. Steve Priola was on that team. So you wonder if there's any of that still lingers, even though it was 9 years ago, going up there to play them.
And just the nerves of them being the second spot in the whole league. Them having played more games than the Bandits, but still having won 9 and only losing 2. That's pretty good. They're a pretty solid team. So, and to go to Saskatchewan and have that home field advantage for them, I don't know. I'm a little nervous about it.
For sure. And the fact that the league standings overall, you've got Buffalo and Saskatchewan, and then a whole mess of teams right in the middle. And then you've got Toronto, Albany, and Vegas at the very bottom. But there are so many teams in the middle of the league standings. You think about Halifax is in there, Rochester's in there, Calgary's in there, Philadelphia's in there, Georgia's in there.
I think even Vegas might be in there this year.
There's so many teams that are really right in that mix, right in the middle. The Ottawa Black Bears in their first year playing in Ottawa.
The Mammoth, the
are in that mix as
Swarm.
well. The Colorado Mammoth, too, who the Bandits have played a couple of times in the championship finals in recent years. Once we get to the playoff, I mean, the rest of the year, you've got 2 months left in the regular season, just about.
It's crazy.
Going to be a race to the finish. The March to May is just about upon us.
It makes me nervous.
It's always, certainly, as we roll towards playoff time, it's a scary time. That's what the Bandits have thrived on the last few years, though. I mean, you think about last year, they did not lose a single game once they got to the playoffs. They went 5-0. The year before that, they only lost one, and that was one of the games in the finals against Colorado, and that was a game they didn't have Josh Byrne for. So this is a Bandits team that you wonder, okay, how much longer do we have Matt Vince? How long does he have to go? And then what are your goaltending plans after Matt Vince is gone?
That's a scary thought.
I mean, he's 42 years old.
Yeah.
My personal hope, this is a pipe dream, my hope is that Calgary hangs on to Christian Del Bianco for like 2 more years. He doesn't play. And then, once Vince retires, then we get Christian Del Bianco.
Come on over. We'll
Come
welcome
play in
him.
Buffalo. It's so much fun.
Oh, yeah. No place like Banditland,
There
really.
really is no place like Banditland. Well, thank you for joining me, Lily. We're going to take a short break. After that, Jenna Polito will join me to talk about the NHL and the PWHL. I'm Matt Volz. You're watching Sports Hour on WNYF.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move. So I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
We've been down there. You gotta do the same. Post office. All you do is sign. So don't get nervous. Sign your name. For selective service. It takes no time. Just sign on the line at the post office. For selective service.
Hey guys, if you're about to turn 18, you gotta register with Selective Service. It's simple. Just go down to the post office, fill out a card, and turn it in. That's all there is to it. There's no draft now. You're just adding your name to Selective Service's list in case there's a national emergency.
So if you're 18 now, Selective Service, you gotta get down to the post office.
Register with Selective Service. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the law.
Takes no time. Just sign on the line at the post office. Selective Service.
Welcome back to Sports Hour on WNYF. I'm Matt Volz. I'm now joined by Jenna Polito for the last segment of our show. And we're going to be talking some hockey. And even though the Buffalo Sabres playing right now, game not going how we'd like for it to go, the Sabres are down 2-0 at the end of the second period. And it's a little frustrating after an 8-2 win over the New York Rangers on Saturday, Jenna.
Yeah, definitely not the best start after the Four Nations break, which, by the way, Team Canada wins in overtime. That was pretty cool. But, yeah, that game on Saturday against the Rangers was crazy. I think we blitzed them. It was like 5-0 for the first period, and then they scored 2, and we got 3 more. And it just begs the question, why can't we do this every single week? Why can't our players show their talent this way?
In theory, it shouldn't be. The lack of consistency has been very frustrating. But We'll get to the Sabres later. I know you wanted to talk about an event that you were lucky enough to go to over the weekend, which was the PWHL takeover between the New York Sirens and the Boston Fleet, which was a lot of fun. Tell us about your experience.
I was there with our other producer, Anna, as well as Lily, who goes on for NLL. And the PWHL, it's the Professional Women's Hockey League. This began in their inaugural season was last year in 23. And right now they consist of 6 teams, which are all in places that are known for having a really strong connection to hockey. So like think Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, New York, Boston, and Minnesota. So yeah, we were able to see Boston and New York come, and it was great. Boston won in a shootout. That was pretty cool to see. It was also very interesting to see how physical these teams are and how passionate they are and how much they want it.
Yeah,
so it was
absolutely.
really good.
Yeah, that's great. And I mentioned on the show last week before you went that I wondered if this was a trial run for maybe someday Buffalo getting an expansion team. How do you think Buffalo received the game?
I think it was great. I mean, I remember looking at their Instagram and everything. This was packed. Dare I say this was probably the most packed hockey game I've seen in KeyBank in a while. But yeah, it was great. I do know that the PWHL is looking into, I think it could be at least 2 expansion teams that happen this year. Buffalo is not currently like in any articles that I've been reading. It's mostly like Pittsburgh, Chicago, places like that. But with the fan base and how passionate we are, I mean, again, this used to be hockey heaven. I don't know. We would like one.
Well, you say it right. It used to be hockey heaven. Now it's hockey opposite of heaven, pretty much. Buffalo is a city that is so starved for a winning hockey team. I mean, any of us who can remember, and those memories fade more and more with each failure of a season, think back to the years where the Sabres were good and were making the playoffs, and that seems like an absolute joke in some sort of utopian movie now. But there was a time when the Sabres were a competitive team. They were making the playoffs every year. They were making deep playoff runs sometimes. This is a city that is so starved for a winner, and I think a PWHL team could be a lot of fun in Buffalo. And I think it would be ironic, Jenna, if they were immediately better than the Sabres.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you just look at the Sabres are dead last in the Eastern Conference. They have 51 points, which before the Four Nations break, we were the only team without 50 points at least. And to just get it up to that is really sad to think about. And I can definitely see the PWHL, if we were to get a team, I could definitely see them coming in and kind of almost developing a fan base such as the Bandits. Where they're diehard in a different way than Sabres fans, and they are also do well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about Buffalo and Western New York. Obviously, you'll always have your Bills Mafia and that sort of stuff. The Bills are always going to be prominent, but the Bills are also, even if they were to make it to the Super Bowl, your season is only at most, okay, in terms of playing games, preseason starts in August, Super Bowl's in February. So you've got that stretch of the rest of the year where there's nothing going on sports-wise, because to be completely realistic, usually by the time we get to the Super Bowl, the Sabres season is more or less over by that point. And if you can bring a team in here, like you make a great point, Jenna, talking about the Bandits, I think a lot of the reason the Bandits have generated such a following, first of all, because lacrosse is huge here. I mean, I would say Southern Ontario and Western New York is maybe the biggest hotbed for lacrosse in the entire world. But the Bandits have also sort of benefited from the Sabres being so terrible. I mean, there are two teams that play in the same arena, and I was at the Bandits game 2 weeks ago when they lost to San Diego in overtime, and I remarked to my friend that leaving, it was in our family group chat, actually it was. I said that leaving the arena after a Bandits game, after a loss, is really weird.
It felt completely different. I mean, I'm used to seeing, I'm used to walking out after a loss when I'm at a Sabres game, but currently in my record and my history of going to games, that was the first Bandits loss I have seen ever. But it definitely was weird. I didn't really have that sense of kind of like existential dread that the Sabres give to me. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about just the difference in mood between the two teams. You're at a Sabres game and they're up by 3 going into the third period. You're thinking, okay, how are we going to blow this? Because they usually do. And then the Bandits, when they were down 4-0 early against San Diego, I had that confidence that, okay, we're still going to...
Yeah, we're going to come back.
They're still going to find a way to win. Obviously, they ended up losing in overtime, but you look at the makeup of this Sabres roster. I remarked to Jack off camera in our break that it's not even necessarily a matter of talent on the ice. It's a matter of player development and player IQ. I'll lay it out there, Jenna. I think the Buffalo Sabres are the dumbest team in the NHL. And when I say that, I mean that, of course, I'm letting my fan side out and being overly critical and frustrated, but I mean that I think in terms of hockey IQ and sense for the game, the Sabres just don't have that. I mean, at the end of the second period, I was watching between breaks. Owen Power skates in on goal and has an opportunity for a shot. Instead of taking that shot, he tries to drop it back to a teammate who is not there, and Anaheim gets a takeaway. How many times are the Sabres on the penalty kill? And you have 3 players who are playing up top close to the blue line, and they completely forget about the fact that the power play has 2 forwards that no defenseman is in the same area code as, standing right in front of the net. It's just little things like that that come from having the smarts for the game, having the sense for knowing where you should be on the ice, knowing what level of effort you should give. The Sabres don't have it, and they haven't had it for years. I think that's an organizational issue, Jenna.
I definitely agree with you. And speaking more onto the development side of this, just look at Devin Levi. Great player, great goalie, but he needed way more time to develop down in Rochester with the Americans. And of course, we called him up. He did great at the end of the 2022 season?
Yeah, yep.
And then start of the next season, he is terrible and he's getting pulled and sent back down to Rochester. So that's just an example of the kind of talent that we have, what happens and how it's kind of corrupted because of this poor development, because of this poor management. And something I remember when I was watching the Four Nations Championship, actually, they were talking about the USA coach was telling his players kind of to be a little selfish, kind of not think collaboratively, especially since they do want to win and they're trying to get these goals. And I think that can kind of go the same way to the Sabres. I mean, you see so much passing. Sometimes you just need to be a little bit selfish and take these shots.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I just mentioned with Owen Power, that's not an isolated incident.
No.
I mean, that happens all the time. You get players that they try and pass 8,000 times until they eventually turn the puck over and the other team clears the zone. And it's the inability to properly forecheck and set up any kind of an offensive possession. A lot of it, I think, is just defensive lapses. I mean, you look at the Sabres defensively, you have 2 former first overall picks. You have Rasmus Dahlin, who is a top 5 defenseman in the entire NHL, and I have full confidence in saying that.
Yes.
You also have Owen Power, another young, talented player, former first overall draft pick, and you have Bowen Byram, who you got in a trade when you sent Casey Middlestat to Colorado. Bo Byram, a former top 5 pick. He was picked 4th overall a few years ago in the draft. You have that sort of young talent on the defense, but yet the Sabres defense is one of the worst in the league because you have players who don't know where they should be on the ice. Henry Jokiharju is still on the ice in the NHL for some sort of unbeknownst reason. You have Matthias Samuelsson, who you're paying until 2030 for a defensive defenseman. He is out of position an awful lot.
He's either out of position or just out entirely
Yeah, or
with an
out
injury
of the
every
lineup
season.
because he gets injured all the time, and that's not necessarily fair to criticize him for that. As players get hurt, it happens, but you have these legitimate concerns about your defensive depth, and it's an issue that doesn't ever seem to get addressed. Kevin Adams tried that when he signed Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson in the offseason in 2023, and it just didn't go the way the Sabres needed it to go. I really think that more needs to be done to improve the depth of this team. You talk about Dylan Cousins' name potentially being thrown out in trade rumors. Not sure where that's going to go, but Jenna, something's sort of got to give, and it's going to be interesting to see. The trade deadline's not too far away. What is Kevin Adams going to do if he does anything? Can he afford to do nothing?
I don't know. I mean, from what I have been hearing, we do have quite the room with some cap space to potentially make some moves, some very major moves that could benefit this team. I mean, we're definitely out of the running and out of talks this season, but either potentially for players that might be in the draft or draft picks for development, or some veteran players, which I think we definitely do need a little bit more veteran talent. We're such a young team, which that can be a strength at sometimes, but without kind of those leaders on the ice, I think we're kind of losing a little bit of our stamina.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at least for myself personally, there's a lot of names that are potentially looked at in the offseason. There's players who is going to get re-signed, who is going to get, you look at who might be potentially let go of, and some big name free agents out there. I don't know how you feel about it. I really want Mitch Marner in the offseason.
I think that would be great.
I want Mitch Marner on the Sabres so badly. He's a Bills fan.
He's very vocal about how much of a Bills fan he is. I think Josh Allen is his GOAT. I can relate to him there. I think he would fit in very well with the culture, not even just with the team, but Buffalo altogether.
Yeah, one of the things that frustrates me the most about when people are talking about, should we potentially pursue Mitch Marner? There's been fans that say, well, Marner melts down in the playoffs. He disappears in the playoffs.
What playoffs?
You'd have fans who would sell their kidney just to make the playoffs in Buffalo. And we're talking about Mitch Marner not showing up in the playoffs. I mean, Mitch Marner could basically sit on the bench and do nothing and watch the playoffs. And at this point,
look what happened when Tyrod Taylor brought the Bills to the playoffs for the first time in 17 years. The entire city went berserk.
Yeah.
So I mean, just being able to make it there, even though we know we're probably going to lose within the first round,
Yeah.
it would mean so much.
Sure it would. It's definitely a city star for a winner, and the rest of the season will be very, very interesting to watch. Well, that will wrap it up for tonight's show. Thanks, Jenna, for joining me, of course.
Thank you.
And, of course, thank you to Chris LeGros, Lily Hauer, and Jack Hoadley for joining me to talk about their segments as well. We will join you next week. And until then, you've been watching Sports Hour on WNYF. I'm Matt Volz. We'll catch you next week.